actually wrote this thing called a user guide to working with me. And I was sort of like, okay, like I'm going to own my role as CEO, and I'm going to basically make it very clear to people what my expectations are of them. It was a illuminating experience for a lot of my team because they were like, okay, I get it.
Welcome to Money Moves, the show about raising money, making great investments, and building venture scale businesses. I'm Neil Devani, your host and the founder of Necessary Ventures, a firm investing in what the world needs. Each week, we'll talk to folks who have raised anywhere from $10 million up to billions of dollars. We'll learn how they return multiples of 10x to 100x or more to their investors. We dive into their stories, uncovering what worked and what didn't, learning from real experiences to understand the journeys of raising capital and rapidly scaling a business. Money Moves isn't just for those already in the game. It's also for anyone interested in the mechanics of startups and venture capital. Whether you want to raise money, make better investments, or just understand how it all works, Money Moves gives you the insights and advice you need to succeed. So join us each week and hear from those who've been through it all and learn from their journeys. Jay, thanks for joining. I appreciate you coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So for everyone who doesn't know, can you just tell us a little bit about PatientPing and how you got started with it?
Yeah. So PatientPing feels like old news now, but it was a great company back in the day that I started in 2013. That was a care coordination software that notified providers in real time when their patients would land at any healthcare facility. So if they're in the ER, the hospital, nursing home, starting home health, we would notify the provider, and that provider could be a primary care doctor who kind of is interested in what's going on with you outside of the primary care visit. It could be a case manager at a health plan. It could be really anybody who wants to just sort of know your whereabouts when you're not with them physically and you may have healthcare events.
And where did you get the idea to start the company?
I worked at Medicare and I helped implement Obamacare, and specifically the part of Obamacare is value-based care. And one of the things that we were doing was making it worth a primary care provider's time to care about somebody after the clinic visit. So in between visits. So we actually paid doctors more if they kept people out of the hospital. It's sort of I'd say the simplest description of value-based care. So if all of a sudden now you're a primary care provider, you shift from having sort of an episodic clinic-based relationship with the patient to one where you have a long-term interest in their health and keeping them out of the ER, out of the hospital, all of a sudden you need to know what's going on with them. While we were implementing these programs called accountable care organizations and multiple payments and a number of other these programs, a lot of the providers that were taking accountability for the cost were coming up to us in Medicare and saying, look, we'll do this work of coordinating the care, but we need some help. And one of the things is we just need to know where our patients are in real time. Otherwise, we can't coordinate the care. And trying to find problems from my perch at, trying to find solutions to that problem for my perch at Medicare and coming up empty, I thought that this could actually be a really interesting tech business. And I didn't come from tech, so I had to learn a lot of things.
Did you raise money before you had a product and customers, or did you do that part first and like kind of bootstrap your way to some evidence for the thesis?
Yeah, so I was working, sort of moonlighting on the customer discovery part of that in the evenings and the weekends, calling a variety of provider organizations saying, look, if is it hard for you, do you care about tracking your patients right now? Is it a problem for you to not be able to know where they are at? How big of a problem is it? Sort of one of your top 3 problems. If we were to tell you this way, would it be useful to you? And then I would sort of ask them, like, if we charged a penny for it, would you pay for it? Okay, well, what if we charged $1 million for it? And so then I did a lot of price discovery. I did that all while I was working in a full-time job. And then I quit once we got to the point where for our business, you need to get multiple customers at the same time, because if one health system wants to track when somebody goes to the other health system, you kind of need to win them all. And so I had a few customers kind of in a process in Boston, but one that was kind of going further ahead. And I had a pretty good feeling of confidence that the others would sort of follow. And with that, I had a first sort of letter of intent signed by a health system. And that was my sort of trigger to quit. And at that point, I had about $40,000 in my bank account, probably another $90,000 in a 401k. And I brought my personal burn down to like $1,000, $2,000 a month. My friend let me stay in her apartment with her. She had an extra room. And I figured I had like a year basically to live in before I had to get a job. And so my goal was to bootstrap the business and not raise any capital. And so we had a customer, we had a contract. We actually started building the product. I found a technical co-founder who was doing it for sweat equity. It was just when the cost started rolling in around insurance. Our first customer required this cyber insurance. then I had to sort of, we were hosting everything on the free kind of Amazon AWS instance, but then we realized for HIPAA compliance, we needed to get a private rack. And so that cost money. And so all of a sudden I was like dwindling my resource. So I realized we need to raise some money. So we were up with a product. We had our first customer. We were actually charging them for the service. And then I realized I need to get some capital in.
I want to ask you about that first raise, but how did you find the technical co-founder to work for Sweat Equity? I feel like it's a place where a lot of people get stuck and can't figure that out.
Yeah, so at the time there were a bunch of founder dating websites. So it's no different than like Hinge. You go on and you post your profile up as far as like a business oriented founder looking for a technical co-founder. So I joined founderdating.com. I think there was Founder 2B. There was a few other ones, and I looked on there. Came up pretty short, but when I moved to Boston, there was a guy who I knew who taught a class called Healthcare Ventures at MIT at Sloan, and sort of cross-registrant across medical schools in Boston and a few other programs. And I was teaching about value-based care. He had me come and guest lecture about value-based care. So I ended up finding my co-founder through that class. It was somebody who was a computer science and physician, and he came up to me afterwards to talk about his project that he was working on, and I just really liked him, and so asked him if he would consider joining me. And I actually went through a few different people before we found the match, but that was how I met my technical co-founder. It was not easy and pretty nervous because I committed to a customer that we would have a product for them within 6 months, and I didn't have anybody to write the code to start it. I was scrambling for a while.
A lot of mixed opinions, right, about pre-selling versus just building. But I think more often than not, if you go out there and spend time with customers, you're going to find the right thing to build, or at least a better thing versus just operating in isolation.
Totally. Yeah. No, I'm especially in enterprise software, I'm a big believer of building with your customer and really kind of like getting an anchor customer and getting a contract specified, really understanding the problem with the customer before you actually get a product up and running. So we had a contract with pricing before we had anything kind of physical in terms of that you could see or touch.
So when you went to raise the first round, did you have investor relationships already? Did you have good intros to investors, or how did you make that happen?
No, I didn't. I wasn't planning on raising venture capital. The venture capital was kind of a new industry to me. And I was actually growing up, I had two friends who were a little bit wealthier than like one that I met in college, one that was in high school, than like anybody that I ever grew up with. And so one of them actually had his bachelor party, and I was at his bachelor party, and I told him that I was thinking about starting a company, and I asked him if he would invest. And my two friends are both there, and they both were like, "We're in. We'll help you out." And so I had a commitment for like $100,000 each. I think they were willing to put in. So I had sort of $200,000 lined up, and I didn't think I would actually need much more than that. And so that was where I started. But I did go to this event in Boston. It's a decent venture capital community. And so I went to just like kind of getting to know people in tech. Part of it was through this technical co-founder recruiting, and I needed to hire engineers early on. But I went to a event called the Unpitch. It's sort of, they had an unconference. So it's the Mass Technology Leadership Council had this event where VCs are supposed to pitch the founders on, and it's supposed to be more casual. It was really a pitch. Like it was no different than just like, there's 6 of us all sitting at a table, and there was one venture capitalist, and my turn came, and it was like I was the 5th of 6 people, and he got really interested. So he like really pursued me afterwards and took me out to lunch. I remember at this restaurant in Kenmore Square, Eastern Standard. And I remember we had like a 3-hour lunch, and then he sort of had me come meet his partnership, and he sent me a term sheet for $1 million. And that was when I was like, okay, maybe we should think about raising venture capital. So we were in a really privileged position. It was a super, super easy raise because I was very, very proactive about saying, I've already got some friends that are committing. We're not interested in raising capital, which definitely made him more interested. We also were in hindsight now, realizing because I had such I'd say like immigrant scarcity mindset of like, we have to have so much, and really like concerned about overperforming or over delivering, which I think is a common tendency amongst immigrants or children of immigrants who often feel like they need to prove themselves with real results. And we were further along than I think a lot of companies were at that stage, at the seed stage. So I think he sort of recognized that he could probably get a pretty good deal. So we got the first term sheet, and then I had a friend tell me that we should really consider doing a round, like actually doing a process, I should say. And so he introduced me to like half a dozen more VCs. And at the time in 2013, there wasn't a big health tech, digital health sort of venture ecosystem, but I met Google Ventures and first round capital and a lot of other kind of amazing venture funds that thankfully we were in a really good position where a lot of people, our hit rate I think was something like 80 or 90%. There were only a couple of people that said that they didn't want to invest. And yeah, and then we ended up actually raising the round. And that was where I sort of made the decision that we're either going to kind of give up ownership for and control for building something big. And I kind of made that first commitment to doing that at the seed stage, but I felt like I could kind of retract if I didn't want to play super big just because of the terms of the convertible note at the time. It was before safes. And anyways, let me stop there because I keep rambling about how this process went. But yeah,
you're answering the questions before I even ask them. It's great. So you had a really high conversion rate, which means like the pitch was probably really strong and people bought it. If you recall, I know it was more than 10 years ago now, but do you remember the pitch? Do you remember what it was that people resonated with about it?
I think it was just that the problem and the solution were very simple, very straightforward. I think people like that. The place that I came from was one where it was the beginning of this sort of big change that was happening in the country around value-based care. So they found that I was a good fit for this industry. And I think we were just way further along than kind of your traditional seed stage pitch. We also just had an aversion to raising a lot of money. I remember people talking about how little we spent with the amount of progress that we had made. Just we were incredibly scrappy in the way that we approached it. So I think those were some of the things that really resonated with venture funds. And so now as an angel investor, and I see kind of what I think there was a lot of insecurity, maybe is the best word. And when you think of the scale of like highly insecure but competent and like results oriented founder versus like vision, strong, kind of a bombastic future storytelling, strong storyteller, fundraiser, I would say. There's aspects of both that are important when you're trying to sort of rally a group of people, both investors, internally customers, to sort of believe in something bigger than what is today. I was squarely on the side of the spectrum of like insecure, need to prove myself type of founder. And I think that actually work, particularly in Boston. Like in Boston's got a little bit more of like realistic, kind of scrappier founder mindset, or at least like the venture ecosystem. At least I felt, when I've heard East Coast VCs versus West Coast VCs sort of compare the differences, I think that's often what people talk about when they talk about East Coast VCs. Although I did talk to a lot of West Coast VCs that were excited. So yeah, I think that was it. I think it was a combination of those things.
You mentioned obviously that you now angel invest and advise startups. I'm curious, as you look back on your fundraising journey and some of the folks that you work with today, like what are the biggest differences that you see in those processes? And what are some of, I guess, the common pitfalls that you call out for folks that maybe you ran into over the course of your fundraising journey?
It's actually not that different compared to a decade ago. As far as deep empathy for your customer, still super important. Founder market fit, I think, is uniquely important relative to product market fit. And I think, yeah, I mean, like some of the core business fundamentals of like to make something venture backable, I think people have, at least what I recall from before, I think there's a lot of rhetoric now around how TAM is not something that you should really focus on in the early days. I don't think people focused on TAM early on with us because I was pretty straightforward that I didn't think it was a huge TAM for what we were bringing to market, but there was ancillaries that could be exciting, and people seem to be okay with that. So yeah, it feels, I mean, in health tech, digital health, there's just more VCs now. There's a little bit more kind of money and types of organizations available. I'd say that there's more product-oriented founders in our industry. At the time, I think there wasn't as much. One of the things that I'm actually super excited about also, I would say, in the health tech ecosystem is that it was largely a go-to-market distribution game in payer provider facing software or services. But I think with what we're seeing now, with even like I would say, even just like as demonstrated in the AI Scribe market, it's still largely a go-to-market game. But I do think that there's an exciting future where the best products and the companies that build the best sort of innovation engines are gonna win, which is amazing because I think in healthcare before there's just crap products that are out there that still won because they had really good relationships with the right people to get in the market quickly. So those are some of the things that I think are different now. The valuations actually, I'll tell you, like we did our seed, we raised 1.6 at an $8 million cap. Our A was 8 million at a $33 million post. Our B was like 28 million, I think, at a 90 million post. And our C was around 57 million at 260 posts. And then we exited at 550. So like those are not, I don't think those like, I don't think the valuation ranges have changed that much. They went up and down for sure over the course of the the bubble, but I don't think they're that far off. So
I think each round is just like N+1, right? Like your seed is now called a pre-seed, your A is now called a seed, your B is now called an A. Basically, that's
right. That's right.
Did any of those rounds get meaningfully more difficult than the first or second round that you raised?
The thing that we had in both our C to A and our B to C was venture investors who didn't have enough ownership in the prior round. And we had multiple investors. So they all felt a little undernourished in terms of their ownership. So I had internal competition between the seed and the A, as well as between the B and the C. The B round was probably the hardest because we had to start fresh because our seed and A investors had enough ownership. They were willing to do their pro ratas, but I needed to find a new institutional lead. So finding a new institutional lead was a little intimidating because I didn't have like insider term sheets already going out to do the raise. And that was it. And it really did shift from, we were building this network where revenue would come later, but at the B round, it really did shift to more of a metrics driven assessment of the business. And so if our revenue traction or our revenue pace or our funnel metrics weren't looking exactly kind of top of market where our valuations were, where we were sort of seeking valuations, I think investors were quicker to dismiss the asset overall and not value kind of like the storytelling, I would say. A little less. I mean, there were some that still sort of saw the vision, but it was just a much more metrics driven assessment.
Was part of that at all a lack of understanding on the investors' part of the healthcare space, or?
Yeah, I do think so. I remember there's a very famous investor. It was Bill Gurley. He was like super interested, and I loved learning from him. I learned so much from him. And there was some advice that he gave me that was just like wrong because it didn't translate to our industry. And I think when he was trying to understand some of the network effect dynamics, it was harder for him to sort of wrap his head around. But I learned a lot about how to build network effect businesses. And so building a network effect business in healthcare, I think, is its own unique animal. And I think that was hard for some investors to understand. But like overall, I think the assessment that most people did, was it smarter when they had healthcare depth? I think so. Yeah. I mean, for sure. I mean, they just got it a lot faster. But when it got to the metrics driven assessment of the business, it was just like, oh, you have 2 customer acquisition costs, and this is what they're looking like. And they were able to sort of turn it into a mechanical model that I think was not that inaccurate.
Did you pitch much departure from those metrics? Like as you're raising the B, you're showing your past performance as credibility for what you're saying the future is going to look like. But was that future significantly different, or were you saying, yeah, we're going to continue on this pace with these kinds of metrics? Like, what was the story that you were trying to sell?
Yeah, no, I mean, so this is at the B round. At the B round, I think I'd say the seed round was product market fit. At the A round, it was like, we can get to 10 million in revenue off of this core product. And we have a reason to believe that we can build distribution well enough to get it sort of launched. At the B round, it shifted from like, okay, how big can this get? Like that was really the question. Like, can you get to $100 million in revenue? And then at the C round, it was like, are you going to own this market? Because there was a race emerging between us and 2 other competitors. And like, how are you going to be the king of this category? And then like, what are you going to do from here? That's where it really started to shift. It was more the like category king question than like, what are you going to do for the ancillaries? So the metrics driven approach was like, can you actually build the engine to get to 100 million in revenue off of this core product? And that was a pretty mechanical analysis. It was like, what are your sales marketing expenses? What are your funnel metrics? I learned a lot, honestly, about how to assess the business internally to see if we were going to sort of create a lot of enterprise value.
I want to go back to the Bill Gurley thing, because I'm curious, like, what are some things that he taught you that you didn't know, especially things that he hasn't talked about publicly or that are maybe less known? But then also, what do you think's a piece that he didn't get at first about the business?
He sent me a document, which I think he published a blog post on, around like the 10 rules of, it was either marketplaces or network effect businesses. And at the time we were like, do we resemble any of these like marketplace businesses like Uber, Airbnb, or even OpenTable, or is there something different? Like what is the shape of our network? There was good sort of context setting points around the types of networks. And there were many sort of like, this is a while now ago, but I remember there were many rules in there that or just like kind of truths to like, I think he was doing this basically saying like, there's an Uber for everything right now, and not all these Ubers for everything are going to work. So like Uber for home cleaning, Uber for parking spots, like these are not all going to work. And there's some qualities to businesses that will work, like Airbnb and Uber. And so he would say things like high transaction volume is important, or trust is important. Or maybe that was from a different VC, but because I remember there was like all this talk about Airbnb and what they did with the sort of, I think it was Mark Andreessen who said that they added a zero to the amount of money that they give the person back if there was some issue at the Airbnb.
Yeah, it was like 5 to 50 when there was like the first time there was like some negative press, they like went really aggressive to fix it.
Really aggressive on trust building. Yeah, and I think there was an aspect of that in what I learned. There were some things like this, like supply side versus demand side. Like how do you focus on building supply relative to the pace at which you're building demand? Things like launch one market first, get really good there before you launch other markets. Doing unscalable things in the beginning. I remember that was a big one that I learned, which is like to sort of get a flywheel spinning, you often need to put a lot of elbow grease into sort of getting it going. And that may cost money for the short term, but then you need to prove that it is going to, like the flywheel is going to catch and it's going to start spinning. But in the beginning, you kind of need to like take a wrench to it and just like start to get it moving. I remember sort of learning some of those truths. I think the thing that one of the things that he mentioned to me, which I remember being so energized from just being able to be in his orbit and walking away from a conversation where he said like, you should give this away for free. And there was one market in Michigan where we ended up almost giving away the product for free. And it was probably one of the biggest mistakes that I made early on, because giving away products for free when you're a consumer product or other types of networks where you just need to build a network and then you can monetize a variety of applications off of it, that wasn't actually the sort of fundamental nature of our business. It was expensive to get the network built. The first product that we were selling off of this network that we built was incredibly valuable. So underpricing it almost like devalued all the work that we did to build the network. And there were competitors that the state decided to fund to bring into our market that just created sort of a race to the bottom dynamic. And I think that was a mistake. So I don't know if that was just like not understanding healthcare or just sort of applying some of his rules when he saw that there's the potential for a network to get built, that I just didn't really map appropriately to our industry and took his advice kind of blindly, I would say.
Yeah. Or maybe I think kind of where you're getting at, maybe there's like another move that needed to follow there, right? In terms of monetizing whatever the value was underneath, but you just didn't get there because the landscape changed before you could.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, because like it is funny. I would say that like going back to the question, like what's changed from then to now is like, there's always like for founders, there's like the it CEO, the it founder, Jeff Bezos, or, at the time, like Travis was sort of at the, TK was sort of the top of his game. Uber was like the it company, Uber and Airbnb, and we all wanted to learn from them. And we do this thing of like over mapping like our business or who we are as individuals to these people. Like it was like when Steve Jobs was really hot and everybody was going around wearing like black turtlenecks. It's like, you're not Steve Jobs. And for me, it took a while to like realize that I just am who I am, and I have to sort of be authentic in my own leadership style, not keep trying to like pretend to be like everybody else or like some book that I read. So I'm sure in the early days, my employees were like, okay, who is he today? What book did he read this past week? What tweet did he see that is going to make him some flavor of a different kind of tech asshole? I think that founders have a tendency to do that. And in my era, it was these network effect marketplace businesses that I think we were all excited to learn from. The rules didn't always apply to our industry. It's easy to sort of just think that they do.
Yeah. I was at this event just yesterday, and Mike Maples was one of the speakers, and he was talking about one of the most important lessons he's learned in his career is like to be the best version of you. And he's like, if I went out there and I tried to be, Peter Thiel, I would just be a second-rate Peter Thiel. But if I go out there and I'm Mike Maples, I'll be the best Mike Maples.
It's true. It's great advice.
It's like it hits so well when he says it. Very true.
So true. And like in my journey as a CEO, like there was a point at which I remember there's like constant clickbait of like HBR 10 traits of effective leaders, the 5 things that successful CEOs do in the morning. Like, and at a certain point I was just like, no more. Like I just stopped reading all that. And I think the work that I started doing was like, cultivate your own qualities and just like be that version of a leader. And it felt a lot better, honestly. You're not putting up any kind of filter in terms of what people should be following.
Is there something that was, I guess, or a piece of literature or something that you find yourself going back to or recommending to other folks that maybe, I guess, helped you kind of get to that place where you were happy to just be who you were and building the company that you were building and the entrepreneur that you were going to become?
I think the things that help, so there's sort of like the authentic leadership, and then there's like the tools that you need as a leader to outfit your team, outfit your organization so that you can have an engine that sort of moves. And like I think what Patrick Lencioni has done with like The Advantage, for instance, is a book that I often recommend as far as like how to distill what you're doing and create kind of a clear focus for your organization of who you are and what you're trying to accomplish as an organization is one that I like to recommend. There's a point at which the job of the founder shifts to the job of the CEO, and it's less about just like building product, shipping product, getting early customers, and it's more about motivating an organization to deliver on some broad vision and a set of objectives. And that was hard. That was hard for me, because your job shifts to like getting other people to do things and working through other people. And so for that, I think there's a lot of sort of in the category of leadership. Andy Grove's High Input Management is one that I do recommend, because it's just like as a first time manager, you're just like, okay, like this can be broken down into a set of scientific principles or engineering principles around productivity, which I thought was helpful. Ben Horowitz did a great job with Hard Thing About Hard Things. Just like, you don't feel as alone. I think it's a little less, there's a lot more content now around the founder journey. There was a book called Profit from the Core that Bain published, I believe, that I found to be good when you're thinking about like ancillary products. Going from a single product to a multi-product company is incredibly hard. Probably I would say that would rank harder than even like the 0 to 1 stuff. At least for me, it was harder to go from willing a sort of first product into existence and just like where I did all the customer discovery and was out in front of customers, and then just sort of had to get a team to sort of build that and then cultivate it and sell it, to like getting an organization to innovate. That I find to be an incredibly hard thing to do. To like really understand your customer. What are they buying from you today? What would they be willing to sort of open up their checkbook to do that's ancillary to what you do today? It's incredibly hard to do, and very few organizations I think do that well. And so this book, Profit from the Core, was kind of a helpful framework to help me think about how to organize our organization to do that.
You mentioned just briefly on the shift from being, a founder to being the CEO of a company. Was there a specific moment during your building of PatientPing that clicked, or was it a conversation? Or I'm curious how you kind of came to grips with that shift in your roles and responsibilities, because to your point, it's hard to give up. And I know founder mode has been a thing that's been in the zeitgeist recently, but there is a moment where that happens for a lot of founders, where it's like, I'm in charge of an organization rather than I'm in charge of building this product or the specific first thing that's going to get us to market and get us from 0 to 1.
So for me, it was a very specific moment that I can remember. So I had 2 co-founders, and one of them it didn't work out with. And the one with whom it didn't work out, we sort of reached a point, I think, in our evolution where it shifted from like 3 co-founders, like we all get together, okay, everybody kind of huddle, break, okay, I go do my thing, you go do your thing. And it was like a very, very flat hierarchy. And there was a point at which things shifted from it being kind of a flat hierarchy to me being the sort of standard keeper, I guess, of what we need to do. I started giving feedback. I started insisting on things being a certain way. And there were some people in my organization who just didn't want to be part of that. For most of the time, I would sort of be tortured by the feeling like it was me, like doing something wrong, that I had to make everybody happy and I had to please everybody, because if somebody wasn't happy with what I was saying or the feedback that I was giving, or they didn't agree with me, I sort of turned inward and said, like, what am I doing wrong? And there was a point at which I was like, no, this is not me anymore. This is like, I have to just own my role, and I have to sort of set the expectations for my team. So I actually wrote this thing called a user guide to working with me, which ended up becoming quite well known in Silicon Valley. And did a first round review article about it. And in there, I basically documented. I remember I kind of was like up in the middle of the night. I just hired a VP of product and a VP of customer success. And I was like, not going to mess it up with them in the way that I messed it up with a couple of people that were on my leadership team prior to that. And I was sort of like going to emerge as like, okay, like I'm going to own my role as CEO, and I'm going to basically make it very clear to people what my expectations are of them and, of this organization. And so I wrote it all down. I documented it all. And it I think was a, illuminating experience for a lot of my team. because they were like, okay, I get it. And I think that's what people want from their managers in general. It's just like clarity in terms that everybody's trying to please everybody else. And particularly in millennial oriented tech organizations where it's like everybody wants to feel like validated and supported and like they're making a contribution. And if you're the CEO, like you kind of need to make it really clear what is going to work in your organization and what kind of behavior is not going to be tolerated. And if you're kind of wishy-washy on that, it's just you lose productivity, one, but you're sort of in a space of like people just feeling like they're not really sure how they're doing or what they should be doing or if they really belong there. So I just made it like extraordinarily clear what that needs to be, and I was very specific about why I may like just like kind of erupt with my reaction to something versus why I may be like incredibly delighted by performance. And yeah, and that happened probably about a couple of years into the journey where I was like, okay, like I need to own this role. We now have investors who are really counting on us to deliver on something. And I believe that we've got something that could actually become something meaningful.
That sounds really resonant with company cultures generally that are very successful, as well as products that are successful, which is sort of like having a very sharp opinion. And you either like it or you don't, but you're going to have a reaction to it as opposed to something that's trying to be too many things to too many people.
Yeah. And there's a point at which every company just needs them. And I do find that cultures that, this is not a unique insight, just the idea that like companies that tolerate the worst behavior that you're willing to tolerate within the organization is basically the level of productivity that you're going to get from your organization. And it's not just the worst, but if there's like two different ways of doing something within your organization, that may be perfectly appropriate given the nature of the problem that you're trying to solve. But if there's like, often it is like, where's the bar? Like, how much rigor do we need in decision making in this organization? How intuition led are we versus how like data driven are we going to be in this organization? Lots of different ways to make it work, but you just need to be clear about what your organization is. And having been through both building an organization and owning my role as CEO, and also stepping into an organization that had a culture that I became the CEO of that organization, had to sort of institute a set of standards and up leveling of the organization's culture. I can see what happens when you make it really clear what expectations are.
I think like PatientPing was definitely one of the first companies that proved out this model around patient engagement. And in today's world, in today's society, at least, and I'm sure Neil, you can attest to this, we see a ton of companies that are coming out and trying to build with kind of that ideology. With the world of AI and everything that's happening right now in health tech, one of the things you noted that I thought was really interesting, that we were talking about differences between now and then, which I think is still to this day, is how do you establish yourself as a market leader, given that everyone is kind of building with the same technology underlying, and how do you differentiate yourself in today's market? I'm curious to just get your opinion on how you would do things differently in today's world versus when you built it for the first time.
We ended up splitting the enterprise value created in our industry with two competitors. And I'd say that two of us ended up taking the majority of the market, and the third had a reasonable chunk of the market. So we sold for just using exit values as sort of the, I guess, final mark of value creation. We sold for like around 550. Our competitor sold for 600 or 600 plus. And then the third company sold for like 400 and change. So like there could have been one that sold for, that created all of the enterprise value or the majority of the enterprise value. And we did have an investor at many points along the journey who was telling us to be more aggressive when he saw that a race was emerging, to ramp up spend, to ramp up just the aggressiveness level. And I remember just being so buried by the pace at which we were going and just feeling so exhausted, honestly, at many points along the way, where I was like, how can I go faster? Like I felt like we were at our limit, but I wish we would have gone faster. And I think there are some laws of physics that would have made it very difficult to do that. But if we had hired faster, opened up more markets, built more sales resources, kind of had more sales resources going after some of our competitors' territories earlier on, that sort of pie chart would have looked, I think, could have looked different in terms of who grabbed the market. In today's era, how could you do that? It is interesting. I mean, I kind of am seeing this in the AI scribing market right now with the players that are out there, and I'm an investor in one of them, and I'm just like amazed at how incredibly impactful they are, and they have been with product innovation. And I want them to sort of be that aggressive on their go-to-market side of it. And I think that there's companies that are being that aggressive on the go-to-market side of it. So in my market, I think in hindsight, I don't think we were sort of a little bit like, we had religion on product, and we felt like our product needed to be amazing. And we spent a lot of money on like design and kind of front end, but it was really the bulk of the value often was just in the data that we were mining. And I kind of wish that we would have just realized that and not spend as much money on product engineering in the early days and spent more money on go to market, just like brute force go to market, feet on the street. Today, I think the ecosystem is changing, and a lot of the software a lot of the products that are being sold into the enterprise, in the payer and the provider side of it, have less to do with data moats or proprietary data sets and it really is like the intelligence and kind of the product that are getting built. So I think the arena's changed a little bit, not in every domain, but it is, like I said, it's a very, very exciting phase of the industry where like companies with the best products are going to win. And we talk more about this, but like if you compare like EHRs, Epic didn't win because they had the best product. They had incredibly effective go-to-market, and there was an incredible leader follower market at that time with Kaiser and some of the large AMCs that others just sort of followed, and Meaningful Use kind of complicated things in terms of like the fear that a CIO had in terms of what solution they would buy. Now it's like it's a pure technology arena. Like it's easier to replace a product once you've installed it. The contract lengths are not multi-year. There isn't big installation implementation periods. And so you really do need to have amazing products.
Only took about 10, 15 years for us to get there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, at least.
Before we go to the investing side of it, walk us through the acquisition. Like, how did that come about? What was the conversation like internally with folks? How did you make that decision?
In our industry, just because it was a somewhat under the radar industry, but it was an important application that we were sort of, I'd say in many ways, like facilitating the value-based care transition. There was one other company that, unsurprisingly, we were constantly in dialogues about merging, and an amazing company, incredible founder, a company that I would say was probably the best competitor to have because they were smart, they were aggressive, and they were just an innovative company in a lot of domains. So I think we often talked about putting the businesses together, but for one reason or another, we weren't able to get there. But I always thought that was going to be the exit for this business, or at least like the time at which we would kind of transition to another stage. But they sold, and it was out of nowhere. I saw the announcement in December of 2020, and I remember thinking, oh, okay, that changes things. And they sold to a post-acute care EHR system. And I remember thinking, oh no, that's a bigger toolkit that they are now bringing to customers. And I was pretty intimidated, honestly, by our ability to compete against that combination of products now.
And you didn't have any conversations with that acquirer before that?
We did, but I think they were just sort of sleuthing, but they had already had their heart set on the other company. So they did approach us, and I didn't realize that they were very actively in a process with the other company. And I think they just met us to, honestly, it felt like a check the box exercise to sort of validate their initial desire to go with that company. I don't know if they had kind of a more of a relationship between the founders or whatever it was, but it did feel pretty crappy, when you see like your competitor get bought, but you're like, well, what about us? Why didn't you have any interest in us? So I was confused by that, but I was talking to other people at the time, but not seriously. So the company got acquired by a company called Point Click Care, and Point Click Care has competitors. They have other companies that are trying to compete in the post-acute care EHR space, and there's a broader ecosystem there. And so I think at that point, the companies that didn't win the acquisition of our competitor started to approach us because we were one of two assets left in the industry. And at that point, I was like, oh, okay, like maybe now is the time to consider a sale. Also, I was like, oh, well, we're now, and of the two that were left in the industry, I'd say we were higher growth. We were very kind of the same product across the board. We were cloud-based. So there's a lot of reasons why acquirers were excited about our product relative to the third company that was in the category. I think I was like, oh, there's now scarcity value, because if we go to one of them, then there's only one left, and that wasn't the most sought after asset of the three. So the timing was right in terms of there was more buyers than there were assets. We were the best company left in the space. And I think there was like a threshold at which I felt like this would be a deal that our board and I would be excited about. I'll tell you, like, as a founder, when you raise a round of venture capital, there's a phase at which your numbers don't support the last round that you just did, the price that you just did your last round at. And then there's the phase after that where you're like, okay, we're in the clear. It's going to be an up round. This is going to be great. And the phase when you've raised the round and you have a post money that your numbers don't support yet is probably the most stress inducing time of a founder's cortisol levels. I would say it's like they're probably the highest during that phase where they know they're not worth what they just got priced at. But then after that, you're kind of coasting. And I knew we were at that point. I knew we were like worth more than our last valuation, but probably not at the point where our Series C investors would be excited. Thankfully, though, like I said, our seed round and our A round investors were basically the same because the insiders just led the A round. And then our B round investors were basically the same as the C round investors. So the basis on the C round investors was somewhere between the B and C valuation. And so I was like, well, if it clears this price, then I think our investors would all be happy. But we still had 40 or $50 million of cash in the bank, maybe even more than that. And they were very much in the mindset of like, well, we still got a lot of cash. Like, let's just maybe keep going. I will say though, this is a common thing. In fact, it's a conversation I just had with a founder where there's this moment in a company's trajectory where you can potentially exit and it's a completely and utterly life-changing experience for the founder. But the last round investors are like, well, it's a 2x or it's a 1.5x or I'm getting my money back. Like, I don't want to do this. And that is a real thing, particularly if you came from a humble beginning or, more modest sort of means before you started your company. And that's why I'm a big proponent of secondary, by the way, like secondary sales for founders, because it really is stark when you've got a term sheet in front of you potentially to sell the company at a valuation that is, gonna completely change your life trajectory for you and your future offspring and their future offspring, or keep going to get, to eke out another half turn for your last round investors. So there was a price at which that division would have been real, and then there was a price at which I think everybody would have been happy. And so when we did the process, the first term sheet came in at a price that I would have been happy, but I don't know if our investors would have been that happy.
Were they vocal about that price, or you just kind of knew intuitively, or you knew?
No, we didn't talk about it because I didn't want them to feel like I was giving up or I was done. Yeah, so I kind of did a lot of this privately and spun up the process and tried to get to the point where I knew our investors would be excited. So our first term sheet came in, and I felt in my body like this strong desire to sell, which I think was an indication of just how like tired I was, how burnt out I was. But I still was like, there's a price at which just doesn't make sense. There's still a lot of enterprise value. We're growing, we came off of a 60% growth year the prior year. It was like, there's still like a lot of room to run. And this was, mind you, like we were in March of 2021. It was like February 2021. So like the market was on fire, like $1 billion round after $1 billion round for companies that were doing 20 million in revenue. It was just like, it was a crazy time. So, but I did see myself that I was ready to call it, particularly because I was feeling the stress from our competitor being sold. I'd been 7.5 years in at this point. I think I was ready for the right price to do this. So then we were able to get, walk the deal value up. We hired a banker who did an amazing job because I was so emotional about it, and they sort of sit in between me and the buyers, and that added another $75 million of valuation to the business that I don't think I would have been able to pull off if I was negotiating it on my own. That
is a very valuable banker.
Very valuable banker. They earned their fee for sure.
What was your immediate reaction when you signed the paper? And was it one of like relief with a tinge of sadness, or were you like, I'm getting on the plane and I'm going on vacation for the next 6 months and I'm done with this for the foreseeable future?
Actually, the day that we closed, the wires hit, and like I was able to make phone calls to 24 employees saying like they're going to get a wire for over $1 million or several $100,000. Like it's one of the best days of my life. Like it was an amazing feeling to talk about the way that some people's lives will be changed from all the work that they did. And then like my legs went numb. Literally, like I remember I had this numb feeling all the way up my leg, and I called my friend and I was like, I think my life just changed, like fundamentally. This just happened. And I think I just like my body is reacting in these very strange ways that I can't quite understand. So it was a very, very physically and emotionally jarring moment, I think, for my parents who like were on the ride with me. Like it was an emotional moment. It was amazing. I remember we closed, and then the day ended, and it was still COVID, so there wasn't
no getting on planes.
Yeah, no getting on planes. Yeah, but we were in Boston, and my now wife and I, she was my girlfriend at the time, we went across the street and bought a $75 bottle of wine, which I'd never done. And we,
Living large.
we opened it up and drank it. But yeah, that was it. Yeah, it's a wild journey. There's actually, I'm working on a TV show. If there's any founders right now that are approaching an exit on this very topic of, if you think about kind of the exit journey, there's a lot of stories about the beginnings. Steve Jobs in his garage, and Mark Zuckerberg in his dorms. Like, there's a lot of stories about the beginnings of companies, Shark Tank being another one. So that's also a really interesting, emotionally rich time. But the ends are also really interesting. There's less stories about that. And so I think if you think about it in 3 different phases, the first being the boardroom drama leading up to the exit, which is often like rich in drama. There's like big swings in personal fortune. Deals die a lot of times before they actually get across the finish line. Some deals don't actually come to fruition. So there's big kind of unfortunate stories of failure, and there's other stories of incredible triumph. Phase 2 is like the 6 months afterwards, where if you're somebody who came from relatively modest means and all of a sudden you won the lottery ticket, it's like what do people do? That's like interesting TV, I think. And then there's like the re-equilibrating phase afterwards of like, now what? And for, I think, a lot of founders, that hole that they had in their heart, or their just whatever it is that sort of makes them who they are, that fueled their ability to work at a superhuman pace is never filled. And that can translate into depression and kind of a feeling of emptiness and real withdrawal. I think for other founders, they come out of this and they feel kind of a renewed license on life to go make more change in the world. And I think what Warren Buffett said is like, money doesn't make people bad people. It's like money makes you more of who you are. And so if you've already kind of got some major hole, more money is gonna exacerbate that feeling of whatever sort of is not intact mentally for that person. And then I think for other people, it can be sort of a tool for good.
I think there's a Nas line to that effect as well. So Nas and Warren Buffett shared wisdom there. So you had the exit. You could have done a lot of different things. You've decided to do a lot of angel investing, especially in healthcare. What is it that made you want to stay in the industry and angel invest?
I think it was probably a combination of a lot of things. In the beginning, it was wanting to stay relevant, and there were a lot of parts of the industry that I was always like kind of curious about. But when you're in founder mode, I suppose, like you're kind of running really hard at it. So there was probably an aspect of it of just like wanting to stay engaged in the industry, wanting to stay relevant. There's probably an aspect of it which was being curious about other domains, other industries. So it is fun. I mean, when you're fresh off of the grueling process of building a business, I think it's a lot of fun to be able to help other founders through the process, at least like pass on whatever it is that they may like. I'm now part of several post-exit founder communities, but like, it's like you have to sort of be both an observer as well as a participant in these groups. As an observer, it's sort of like seems silly, but as a participant, it actually it's very helpful.
Taxes you've never heard of before.
Yeah. Imagine the topics that are in here: longevity, how do I live forever, biohacking, estate taxes,
Anybody has an extra blood boy they can lend me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But a very common topic is, what are you doing now? How are you finding purpose and fulfillment? And for a lot of people, they seek out angel investing. And I think it's a common thing for exited founders to go down this path and then come out on the other end being like, I hate it. I hate this for a variety of reasons. One is it's kind of administratively cumbersome. Like, you got to deal with a bunch of things, paperwork. It sort of can feel like waste time. You meet a lot of companies. So the yield of like as opposed to just putting the money in the NASDAQ, it's not like a great way to make money. I would say that's not a great, as an asset class, if you're not doing it professionally, I don't think it's a great way to generate a return relative to just putting it in an index fund. And then I think a lot of founders are used to the feeling of control and people listening to you, when you want to do something. And as an angel, that's not the case. Like, they don't care about you. Like, it's not an important position on the cap table. So it's not like they need to listen to anything that you're saying. And a lot of times the advice that you're giving them may be stale and not relevant to their industries. If there isn't a click or a connection with the founder, they can sort of dismiss you as an advisor, which I did that with a lot of my angels too. And I just found them to not be that helpful. So for people who are used to being in control, and that can be kind of demoralizing, I would say. So for a lot of people, they just don't enjoy it. I've actually found it to be quite gratifying as a way to spend time. I really enjoy it. I do find that definitely not all founders find my participation to be that helpful, but I do think that there are many that do. And I really enjoy the relationship that I'm able to build with them. I do like it. I like the thrill of finding companies. It takes a long time to realize if you're any good at it. 3 years into the journey of angel investing, I was kind of like gonna stop because I was like, I'm not very good at this. And you get a lot of bankruptcies before you get any companies that are actually making it. So you feel like you're not doing well, but I powered through and continued to build a portfolio. And I've found that it to be just a really intellectually kind of engaging, as long as I'm being kind of proactive about understanding industries and connecting the dots between companies. And if you're just sort of looking at one company every once in a while and kind of being reactive, I don't think you're really putting together any kind of a perspective on the industry. You're not really learning that much because you get this deep. For most of the companies that I invest in their domain, I probably would say I'm far from an expert for virtually all of them. But I do think that investing across companies now, across domains, and seeing companies within kind of working on similar technology, like a venture capitalist, like I think you're able to connect some dots and put together some perspective on what's happening in the industry. And I'm really enjoying that.
What's the best investment you've made so far?
The two that I would say are probably like the furthest along in terms of markups and valuations are, one is Growth Therapy, which is doing exceptionally well. Incredible founder, incredible company that is amazingly still feels like they've got so much more room to grow. So that's one. The other one is, I think it's Acuity MD, which is one of my former employees, Mike, who I just think the world of, started this company that's sort of helping medical device companies find more customers and grow their customers. And he's just a truly exceptional entrepreneur who's been on a tear. He's just such a disciplined, focused entrepreneur, heavily go-to-market oriented, but Bill has an incredible product founder. I'm sure you guys know this. Like when you having met so many companies, like it's this amazing thing when founder, the right industry, right team, timing's right. It just feels like magic in the company. And that's another one that I just think it feels like that. So
we're gonna jump into a lightning round. We've gone. We could go for another couple hours here, but we're gonna wrap this up soon. So I'm just gonna ask you some quick questions. They're gonna be all over the place. First one: if you had to eat one food for the rest of your life, what is it gonna be?
Ice cream.
Any flavor?
Chocolate peanut butter.
That is a short rest of your life.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is this without help?
I'm gonna go out with a bang.
Yeah, it's a different kind of strategy. What's the hardest lesson you've had to learn in your career?
You can't both be a people pleaser and a effective leader.
That feels like a very immigrant child, hard learning.
Yeah.
Trying to do both. It's almost end of October here. Who are you voting for?
Harris.
Yeah. Some people refuse to answer, so I appreciate you answering. What's been the best moment of your business life?
The first one that came to mind was exiting PatientPing.
Yeah.
I think that was
I feel like you talked about that. And I mean, just getting to make those phone calls sounds like it was a very fulfilling experience.
Yeah.
Are you still in touch with a lot of those folks?
Many of them. In fact, I was in Boston just 3 weeks ago and we had a totally impromptu reunion and it was amazing. I think 50 people or so showed up. It was incredible to see them. I'm working on new companies with former employees. Yes, very much so. There's 3 companies I think in my portfolio that are former employees of PatientPing. So yeah, so I'm still very much in touch with them. I was going to say, like, kind of going on that question, like a similar kind of child of immigrant mindset is like not being able to celebrate wins in the founder journey. You get your first customer. Okay, well, what about the next one? You get your first great hire. It's like, well, now when we get the next hire, then we're going to be good. Oh, you do your first round financing. Well, you got to get the next value. And I had that. I don't think I really exhaled until the one win, which was the exit. And even that, I only sold 70% of my equity. I rolled 30% into the parent organization, which I'm still very, very, very actively involved in. So, but it did feel like that was the one time where I actually exhaled and kind of took a bit of a victory lap. And so, yeah, that was probably the highlight.
It's funny that you've gotten into investing now where that is the same exact problem that you run into over and over and over again, which is like my first ever investment that I make and then the first markup and then the first exit. And then it's like, where's the next one? It's always the same constant battle and thinking through that as well.
I imagine all 3 of us had a point in like middle school or high school where we came home with like a 97 or a 98. And we had someone ask us where that remaining 2 or 3 points was. So that just continues forever.
It was then, and then it was 100%. And then it's like, well, where's the extra credit?
Right.
Yeah.
I used the extra credit to get to the 100. That's what happened.
Yeah.
Okay. Last question for you here. Who's helped you the most in your career?
My parents, I think, just they've been kind of unwavering in their support. And I think like when I get overextended, they're often like chill out. When I'm too chilled out, they're kind of pushing me to go a little further. So yeah, I think they've helped me the most in my career.
All right. Well, here's to Mr. and Mrs. Desai. Thank you for making Jay.
Wow.
Jay, thanks for making the time.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you guys.
Thanks again for tuning in to this episode of Money Moves. If you learned something new or just loved this episode, click below to subscribe. See you next week.